Education is most effective when the voices of students, parents, and communities are not just heard, but centered. That's the idea behind a new push to bring Chicagoans directly into the conversation about the future of our schools. In this edition of the Education First Report, I'm joined by Arnie Rivera, the new Executive Director of the Chicago Education Alliance. Arnie joins me now to talk about the mission of the Alliance, who's at the table, and will these conversations translate into meaningful change for Chicago students and families? Arnie, thanks for being here. So let's dive right in. Tell me about the Chicago Education Alliance and what it hopes to achieve.
Well, thanks for having me, Adrian. As everyone knows, we're at a seminal moment in the history of Chicago public schools. Our school communities are still reeling from the impact of COVID, but thanks to the resilience of our students, our teachers, our school leaders, we've recovered faster than a lot of other school districts across the country. And we see that in metrics such as our high school graduation rate reaching 85%, which is tremendous under any circumstance, let alone after a pandemic. But what the pandemic also showed is that the disparities across demographic groups have only widened. And even though we have a graduation rate of 85%, at this time only 25% of our African American male students go on to secure a college degree at a time where over 70% of jobs in the city require one. So there's a certain urgency that's required across the education community at a time of continued uncertainty, leadership transition, but at the same time, there is an education community that is committed to supporting the district and the students in which we serve. And that's where an organization like the Chicago Education Alliance fits in. As a field catalyst, our job is to help strengthen alignment, build stronger coalitions, and make sure that we're developing collective agendas and priorities that are student-centered, that we could all get behind to keep moving the ball forward.
I love that. And Arnie, obviously, the district is moving toward a massive 21-member elected school board by November 2026. In your board materials, you highlighted a need for fiscal stability, effective governance, and transparent data. You recently brought Heather Wendell, the former chief budget officer from CPS, as your COO. From a strategic level, why is it critical to have an independent organization like the CEA providing long-term fiscal clarity during a year where the governance of our schools is being completely redesigned?
This is the biggest governance shift in the history of Chicago public schools. Across a 2-year horizon, we go from a 7-person mayoral appointed board to a 21-member hybrid school board to, as you mentioned, next year, Chicago will have the largest fully elected school board in America. And with that, one of their major responsibilities is the fiduciary responsibilities of managing a $10 billion enterprise with a lot of complexities and a lot of nuances behind it. And I think it's going to be of utmost importance for the individuals who ultimately serve as school board members, as well as the general public, to understand what's at stake. Because at the end of the day, the fiscal situation for the school district plays such an important role in ensuring continuity, stability, and predictability for school leaders, for teachers, and ultimately the students that we serve. When families send their students to school to start kindergarten, they want to know that the resources, the commitments, the teachers that they're going to have are going to stay through for the majority, if not the complete journey of their students' tenure. And if school leaders don't know what their budgets are going to be next year, let alone 2 or 3 years out, it makes that commitment that we make to our students that much more difficult. So as we see this transition to a fully elected school board, we want to make sure that the candidates that ultimately serve those roles have full visibility in regards to this being an area that they need to focus on, as well as the broader public. We want to make sure there's greater awareness of what the challenges are, but also what are the opportunities as we transition to this new governance model.
And you've launched, to that end, you've launched a co-design effort with 17 community-based organizations and partners. You're actually providing $10,000 in microgrants to these groups. Partners include groups like Build and LASE, Breakthrough, folks that are doing direct work in communities, and you're helping them host conversations in their own neighborhoods. Why was it important to invest in these partners to lead the listening, and how does your empty chair kind of like exercise help ensure that these neighborhood voices are actually reaching the halls of power?
I mean, if we're going to serve the essence of what we are, which is a field catalyst, we need to make sure that we're engaging with all stakeholders that have a vested interest in Chicago public schools. And that includes nonprofit leaders, that includes district and other elected officials, but that also most importantly includes those that are most affected by the decisions that are made on behalf of Chicago Public Schools. And that's students, that's parents, and that's community leaders that that represent them. And we wanted to be sure that before we start identifying what are our priorities, what are the recommendations associated with this work, that we actually hear from, make sure that we're informed by, and ultimately help develop policies and advocacies in partnership with those most impacted by these decisions, especially those furthest from opportunity, so that they're the most well-informed, viable, actionable decisions. But more importantly, if you're involved in the decision-making process to help identify priorities, you will be better equipped and be willing to help support the advocacy for those efforts. And I think that was why it was very important for us to, the way I like to say it is, let's not give the answers to people before we hear the questions that they may have.
I like that. And from just in here articulate, obviously you've held many roles in Chicago. You've been a teacher, you've been a parent, you've been on the board, you've held cabinet level roles. How are those experiences shaping how you show up in the work at this juncture today?
Sure. So obviously, the majority of my career was spent as, at central office and as a cabinet member as well as a board member. But it really is those experiences as a teacher and as a parent that helps inform the lens in which I evaluate the work. And, while I know that my experience as a teacher and my experience as a parent is not indicative of the average parent or teacher in Chicago Public Schools, I have gone through the process as a parent. I have gone through fiscal challenges or policy changes as a teacher. And it's one of those things I like to recall what those lenses look like when we are informing decisions, whether it's at a district level or now in the space in which I'm operating, making sure that those two lenses help inform the ultimate work that we do.
And, kind of big picture as you're thinking about, 1 year, you've been in your role for a few months, but obviously been a part of the education scene for many. What is something you hope comes out of the listening engagement framework, either tied to your personal experiences that you just mentioned, the work itself as it's unfolding? What are you hoping comes out of this work?
For me, I think, oftentimes, district leaders or school leaders, we have a good sense as to what the top priorities are for parents and for teachers and for students. But at the same time, there are often going to be nuances in regards to, number one, how they view an issue. And I want to make sure that when we're helping to identify what those priorities are, we're not just looking at it through the lens of, one stakeholder, but making sure that we're also evaluating it within the context of, all stakeholders. Like, for example, I had an opportunity to meet with a group of around 20 teachers, and some of them were talking about how the fiscal instability has led to, not knowing what positions they're going to be in next year, what that means relative to resources that are going to be available to the school. And I think when you view it as a district leader or as a school board member, you look at it through one lens, but I want to make sure that we're looking at it through the lens of various stakeholders, especially those that are, once again, most impacted by our decisions.
Phenomenal. Well, Arnie, obviously we could talk about this topic and many other education-related topics. Hopefully we'll have you back on Newsroom and Education First to be able to share updates on the listening engagements as they unfold. For now, the Chicago Education Alliance's upcoming community listening sessions are expected to take place across neighborhoods throughout the city, offering parents, students, educators, and community partners a real opportunity to help shape the future of Chicago Public Schools. For more information on how to participate, you can visit the Alliance's website at chicagoeducationalliance.org. Stay with us, Chicago. Newsroom 2.0 continues after the break.